Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of HR Sound Off Live. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, today we are talking about organizational culture. And to have this conversation with me, someone who I've had this conversation with before, and I know he's very passionate about culture. So today I welcome to the show Galen Emanuele. You know how we do. We're going to bring up some questions. We're going to have a conversation, but this is your time, your conversation, and I want you to be a part of it. So if you have any questions, any comments, please raise them in the comment section in YouTube, and we'll be sure to pick up your questions and your comments and discuss them in our conversation. You're a part of this too. This is your show. So I'm going to bring up Galen. Here we go.
Oh, hello.
How you doing?
I'm great. It's good to be here. Great to see your face. Your huge smile. I love it. You're so smiley.
Yes, I do love a good smile. I think it's important to bring out those features in the face. No grumpy face. And
that's right. No grumpy face.
No grumpy face. It's always good to see you, Galen Emanuele. I love having conversations with you. And we're talking about this topic that we are both very, very passionate about, but I think you saw a bit more than me. Today we are talking about organizational culture and why it's not just an HR thing. I think for a long time people have, developed this belief that when it comes to creating organizational culture, just leave it to HR. But we know that that's not the case. And so we're here to have that conversation about where organizational culture really sits and how we can create intentional, awesome organizational cultures, right?
Yes. My favorite topic.
I know. Awesome. So let's get started. We're going to start with the basics, which is, can you just tell us who you are and what's your origin story and how did you get here to this point where you are talking to organizations, speaking on huge platforms, and telling people what organizational culture is and why it matters. I am so happy to see you guys joining the conversation. Please drop in the comments where you are joining us from and answer this question. Is organizational culture just an HR thing? What are your thoughts on that? Galen and I will be tapping into your comments as we have our conversation. I'm going to drop off the screen for a few moments so that you can hear Galen's story.
Okay, hello. My origin story. It's such a superhero kind of question. Not that I'm a superhero, but I was like, well, I was bit by a radioactive spider. Okay, origin story very quickly. I was born in Vancouver, Canada, lived in Canada for about 12 years and then grew up in Washington State, in Bellingham, actually, and now I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been there for about 6 years. And how I got into doing this work is I've always had marketing and sales jobs right out of high school. That's been my sort of career path, and always very curious about like leadership and reading leadership books and just why people do what they do. I'm highly curious in that space. At some point in my career, I also started taking improv, and so I started teaching performing improv, like Whose Line Is It Anyway kind of improv, and fell in love with that. And so those sort of two paths eventually collided. I became the marketing and sales director for the improv theater that I was performing and teaching at. And when I got that job, I'm also just an entrepreneur in my bones, in my blood. And I just saw an opportunity because I'd been teaching and performing improv to work with teams and organizations and businesses and to basically take the skills and principles and practices of improv and apply them to business to improve communication, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, team culture, leadership skills, those types of things. And so I started working with teams and individuals to sort of develop that curriculum, and did that. I fell in love with it. Within a couple of years of that job, I was working with bigger teams, Microsoft, et cetera. And I was like, this is the only thing I ever want to do. I left and started my own company, and that was about 7 years ago now, almost. So that's it. And then just sort of that escalated from doing individual kind of skills training and leadership training to now working more with teams, executive teams and leadership teams to develop, establish, and sustain really intentional, exceptional culture. And I still, half my time is still spent doing skills training of, around communication, around leadership, navigating conflict, giving and receiving feedback, those types of things. So I don't want to talk too long. People are always bored by bios, but that's sort of how I came to do what I do now. And I love it. I'm very, it is my bliss. I love what I do every day. And I'll try not to be too excited and talk too fast on this on this show today, because talking about culture and how teams can develop culture and create culture is very awesome to me. So yay. And I love all the comments.
Yes. I see your team is here giving you support. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
So good to
Jay's
see
here.
you.
Emily's here.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So come on in, join the conversation, get comfortable. I see you're giving feedback as well. Culture is not just an HR thing. Awesome. So let's kick off our conversation, Galen. I got to ask you this. What does culture mean to you? And what does it mean to you as the president of your own organization? And, just on a whole, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, great question. And there's so much here, right? When we talk about culture in general, even the question of like, what is culture? What is your culture? How do you do culture? It's hard to ask 10 people and get anywhere near the same answer from 10 different people. So I will, and part of my work is helping organizations define culture. So when I think about culture, organizational culture, team culture, the way I think of it is this. It's basically, in very simple terms, culture is it is the way that people show up and perform their roles and treat other people on the team. Essentially, it's the ground rules based in behaviors that define what it means to be part of a team in terms of how people show up and impact each other and do their work. So that is to sort of define culture. It's really sort of culture is what you do. It's how you behave. It's how you show up every day. It's, to me, it's not what you say that you believe. Culture is not a list of sort of corporate values about trust and integrity and respect and like who we claim that we are and what we say that we believe. Culture really truly is like on the ground level. How do people treat each other? How do they show up and do their work every day? What are those behaviors? What are those mindsets? And to create really exceptional culture that's intentional, we have to define those things. And so instead of just saying, be kind to each other and stuff, but to really, really narrow in on like, what are the ground rules of what's expected of every single person here in this organization? So what does culture mean to you? On my team, it is, we have a document, and this is something I help teams create, but we have our sort of Shift Yes DNA code, and it's our cultural DNA code that says, these are the tenets of what it means to be here. This is how we show up. These are non-negotiable. And it's something that we talk about often. Every performance feedback evaluation conversation I have with my team is based in that, right? Like these are our ground rules. So culture to me it's paramount in people's performance, in how they feel about their job, their engagement level, what is expected of them in terms of, we talk a lot, in HR and leadership around like holding people accountable. And to me, culture is the answer to holding them accountable to what, right? It's like something that's clear. So I could talk a lot about that, but culture to me, it means sort of like setting a very clear set of expectations and ground rules that just be like, this is what it means to be here. This is how we show up. This is how we treat each other in regards to just the human pieces of interacting, feedback and change management. And, the five, we have tenets, and then those are sort of broken down into behaviors, but the five kind of tenets of our DNA code are be exceptional, lighten up, own your shit, ever forward, blood type, grit. Those are the five. And then, we have a series of a short paragraph under each of those that says, this is what that looks like in practice. This is what that means for us. So good. I'll stop talking, but that's what culture means to me.
That means a lot to you. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. And there's so many nuggets that you can pull from that. What I love is that it's, we've had this conversation before about, not just having a set of, that value statement on the wall or the missions, or these are our core values, but what do they mean? And do people really understand what they mean? And that culture is so much more than that. It should be not just the DNA of the organization, but everyone who is a part of that organization. It should be embedded in how they show up at work every single day. That's the ethos and who we are. Yes. I think a lot of people are struggling with this right now, Galen, because imagine for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, we haven't been working the same way we normally would. And I think one of the things that I see coming up a lot in studies now, in terms of what HR professionals are struggling with, is this piece on culture. How do we create culture when we're not together? It's more than a Zoom call, it's more than Microsoft Teams or remote HQ. How do we create culture when we're not together? That's a side question.
Yeah, and to me, that obviously with teams that I'm talking to right now is incredibly important. These are conversations of like, now that we're sort of hybrid remote and coming back to the office, and how do we have intentional culture when we don't have that sort of like face to face time, that the water cooler chat kind of stuff, and like how do we still sustain and maintain culture?
Exactly.
And I think it's elevated the need and the importance for us to define what that is, right? To say for our team, for our organization individually here, this is our culture, and to get really clear about how do we treat each other? How do we show up, and what are the things what are the behaviors, what are the mindsets that we really value, and focusing on those, instilling those things, and getting, again, kind of moving past broad concepts and ideas. Our culture is trust or integrity or respect. It's to be like, this is how we deal with static or conflict. These are our mindsets and how we approach feedback, and our work, right? Paying great attention to detail, like, to make timelines on time. And, it's like all the things that encompass how do we, what does a 10 out of 10 year look like for every employee in terms of, how they behave, their mindsets, how they treat other people, how they approach their work. So, being very, very intentional about that, and organizations that are like, man, free time, play time to like for the team to bond, and we show who we are by what we do, right? So it's like, if we're coming together once a week or once every other week as a team, and we're doing, hey, here's a 5-minute like TED talk about like, here's things on your team that people are experts in, things that you wouldn't even know that they were, and or we do a team show and tell, or we find ways to like connect people and bond and do things outside of work. Which is not a requirement, that's not necessary, but a team that says, hey, we value connection between employees, is like, then we do things that exemplify that, right? That bring that to life, by taking action, by behaviors, by the things that we do, not just saying these are what we believe, but this is us putting these things into practice.
For sure.
Yeah.
I see that we're being joined now from Jamaica. I see Lawson Douglas here from Jamaica. Nice to see you, Lawson. I see Tacoma in the house. Hi, Regina. Nice to have you. I saw Barbados. I saw Tiffany. Nice to have you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the conversation. And I think that you're so right, Galen. I really believe that even as it's from a team perspective, you can have your own culture, versus from an organizational perspective, then you have a different culture, but you're all coming together to achieve one goal. So even if teams found a way to create their own culture and dynamic, that would make perfect sense for them to find ways to stay together, even though we're not together. So I really love that spin on it as well. Well, let me ask you this. What role does HR play then in organizational culture? So we know culture is not an HR thing. At least it's not something they create in a silo and go, okay, this is company culture, go forward, be cultured. We know it's not that. So what role does HR really play in organizational culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if my answer is kind of like out in left field or kind of off the wall here, but I think that something—
I'm here for all of that.
All of it. Okay, here's my thought about this. Something that HR professionals, HR business partners can bring to the table for an organization is the skill, the know-how, the knowledge of how do you establish culture. And I think where somebody coming in to be the director of sales or the director of marketing or the COO isn't necessarily going to be their kind of like level of expertise. And so because HR generally is the function that has to do with talent development and people, then the conversation around culture generally falls to HR. And I think HR's role in that is to come as an HR business partner and be like, I understand how to create culture. I understand how to establish culture, maintain, sustain culture, and be consistent and have success with creating intentional culture. And I think that if HR business partners bring that skill level to the table, just like if somebody is the director of sales in an organization, they're bringing a lot of experience and know-how of like, this is how you do sales, and they can train their salespeople. And right, I think that that role for HR, it's like to be very well versed and have the skill of knowing how to establish culture and drive culture and sustain culture is important. But does it solely belong to HR? Absolutely not. Right? It has to be embedded and begin at the executive level, from the top level of leadership. Has to start there and be generated from there, and sort of like, right, and be implemented all the way throughout the organization. It can't be just like, hey, HR, you go handle culture, we're going to do other things over here. It's culture is, if it's the way people show up and approach their jobs and treat other people, there is nobody inside an organization that doesn't apply to, whether the CEO or their frontline employee, who's customer facing, that's worked there for 3 days. It's like every single person here, what are the ground rules of how we show up? How do we, right? What are those ground rules that we don't badmouth or we don't gossip about other people, our mindsets around change, or, all the things that dictate, that say these are the ground rules for how we show up as a team. And so, to be more succinct and clear about like the role that HR plays, I think that they have to be champions of this work, but I think that they, that skill, the knowledge. I see culture as being a skill. I think it's something like sales or marketing or operations, something that you can be well-versed in, understand on a deep tactical, strategic level, and bring that level of knowledge and awareness to the organization, right? To like in any other kind of initiative, get that buy-in from the executive team and start creating those sort of doing that work, creating those initiatives and be driving culture inside the organization and supporting that work. But it is not a, hey, this belongs to you, doesn't apply to any of the rest of us. I think that's important. It does not solely belong to HR.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I'm looking at Regina's comment, and she's saying that this is a very timely discussion because she is building a fully remote team with a strong culture. So she feels it's very different from any she's ever seen or been a part of. What advice do you have for Regina?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to kind of get into this through the other questions that you have in terms of how do you establish culture, how do you drive those things. So I'm excited for that comment, Regina. It's great, and I, this is my world. Is something I love. So I think that through the conversations and stuff that we talk about today, I think hopefully being able to give you some guidance and tools, and here's exactly sort of like step by step how to go through doing some of that work. But it's different, I think, than things people have been a part of, and even establishing very intentional, clear culture is something that most organizations just like don't really have in place. So it's exciting, but it's really about intentional. And especially if you're driving that conversation, you're developing that culture, you're creating that culture. It's like, what do you want it to be, right? What would a 10 out of 10 look like? What systems and processes, what things can you put into place that make sure that that's right, that you're setting a gold standard for how everybody's expected to show up, what a 10 out of 10 looks like very clearly, et cetera. So it's great. Yeah. I love it.
And I love the fact that you talked about leadership being the driving force. I think a lot of times as HR, we feel like it starts with us. And for some people it does. But then if you don't get that buy-in from the top, then it's going to be really hard to create that culture across the organization if it's something that you're driving in a silo. And so where that accountability sits with leaders actually being involved in that process and filtering down, this is what we truly believe culture is. This is what our culture is. This is what we stand for. When HR does the onboarding and they talk a little bit about culture, bringing in leaders and letting them share that experience so that also, when new people come into the organization, they can see, yes, this is really what they believe in. This is the ethos that is created and it's supported from the top. Then people have more respect to go forward with what the organization is putting forward because they can see that they're being intentional and leaders have bought in. And it's not just something that they're trying to filter to the people below, but It's not something that leaders have bought into. So I love how you brought that in.
Yeah. And you touch on a couple of really critical points, which are the commitment level to the culture that you define, once it's clearly defined, has to be 100%. If anyone is exempt from acting in alignment with that very clearly defined culture, it's garbage. Like it is useless. It's exactly what you said, which is basically an internal marketing ploy to keep lower level employees in line. But people with senior enough titles, or if they've been there long enough, then those things don't apply to them in terms of how they behave, how they treat other people, how they do their work. And if that's the case, if there's inconsistency there, if we're not 100% committed and consistent across the board, like it's garbage. It's right. It's that's what exists in many organizations is, we have these, list of corporate values of trust, integrity, respect, but we have leaders that yell at people in meetings or, badmouth other people and behind their backs and stuff, where it's like none of those things promote or are the behavior of trust or integrity or respect or any of those things. So when employees see hypocrisy and that disconnect there, it's like, okay, this is really just, it's internal marketing. It's not real. There's no substance to it.
Exactly.
And that's so key to culture, which, we're going to get into, but so important.
Absolutely. I want to find out from those of you in the audience watching right now, what does your current culture look like from an organizational perspective? Whether has it changed since you started working from home? What does it look like? What do you want it to look like? As you start to return to work, what are your thoughts on what culture will look like when you return back to work? What are your fears in terms of what is going to impact this period of being home? What impact that is having on your organizational culture? Do you think it will be the same when you start to return to work? Chime in, give us your thoughts on that. Let's talk about how we develop a culture, company culture. And you touched on this quite a bit already, but we know that culture is not something that is solely driven by HR, and it's not just about creating a bunch of values and sticking them on your wall. I've walked into many organizations and seen those pretty placards that sit on the back of the wall and go, these are our values, this is our mission, this is our vision. But is that all there is to culture? Read the board, look and see our values. That's what it is. That's what we're about. Just do that and you'll be okay. Or is it more than that? Because I know, like in some of our previous conversations, we talked a lot about a code of conduct and what that means in terms of what we will stand for, what we won't stand for as an organization. So let's talk about that, Galen.
Let's do it.
What matters?
Let's do it. I'm gonna frame this up with a little sort of like analogy that I like to use that I think is really important. And for me, I'm careful about this because I know that the way that most organizations approach culture is how you said. We have a mission statement, we have a vision statement, we have a list of values that are like, these are the things that we want people to sort of like show up as, right, and embody here in our culture. And I think that I just think it's incomplete. It's as incomplete as having a sales platform or a marketing, like strategic marketing plan in your organization that was as in-depth as make great products and like market them to people and they'll buy them. It's like, cool, yeah, foundationally that's right, but there's a deep, like, what are the systems and processes? How do we actually get to where we want to be? And I think culture is very similar. So here's the analogy I want to say that I like to sort of frame up this way in terms of like the difference between values or a code of conduct. And so I'm going to give you a scenario, which is like, there's two people that exist, and person number A, like the first person, they claim that they're a shoplifter. They're like, I steal from stores all the time. I'm a shoplifter. They brag about it to their friends. They're like, when I go in a store, I put things in my pockets. I put clothes on underneath my clothes. And like, I walk out, I'm a shoplifter. I love shoplifting. But in reality, they say that, but in reality, they never shoplift. They would never steal from a store. They're afraid of getting arrested. They don't actually shoplift. They just tell everybody they're a shoplifter and brag about it, right? That's person A. So person B, okay, that's like scenario one. Person B is somebody who says they would never shoplift. And if they hear about someone shoplifting, like, oh my gosh, I would never do that. Like, right. Just like very critical of that. If they're like, if any of my friends ever shoplifted, I wouldn't be friends with them. Right. They're like, say, I would never shoplift. Shoplifting is like horrendous. I can't believe anyone would ever do it. Like very judgmental of that kind of thing. But that person B, also shoplifts. They go into stores, they steal things, they put things in their pockets, they put clothes on underneath their clothes, and actually steals things from a store. So person A claims that they're a shoplifter, but they don't actually steal things. Person B claims that they would never shoplift, but they actually do steal things. Which one of those two people is a shoplifter? Only person B, the person
Yeah.
who actually steals
Person
things.
B.
And the point there is that you can say whatever you want to say about you as a culture and you as an organization. You are not what you say that you are what you do. And that's it. You are defined by how do people treat each other and show up and do their jobs. And like, what are the mindsets? What are the behaviors that are actually in practice inside your organization? You can say trust and respect and integrity and loyalty and excellence, but if people don't ask for feedback, or leaders don't ask for feedback and they don't receive it well, if we have silos between departments and departments don't like each other, or if there's a lot of gossip and bad mouthing of people, right? But our corporate values are trust, integrity, respect, excellence, teamwork, right? Like that's rampant. And all my point is that you are not what you say you believe. You just are what you do. And so I think organizations getting beyond a list of values and broad, like loosely understood concepts like respect, and getting very clearly into defining what are the behaviors, what are the ground rules of what it means to be part of this team, right? And very specific things. We ask for feedback on a regular basis, and we see feedback as an opportunity to grow. We don't see it as a threat, and we receive it with grace.
Yeah.
That's a behavior. And and integrity, 10 people think that is something different, right? There's multiple ways to interpret a loosely, broadly understood concept, but that very specific behavior, we ask for feedback on a regular basis and we receive it with grace, right? And when we give feedback to somebody else, we give it from a place of concern and care and investment in their success, not as a criticism. Those are behaviors. And so I can look at anyone in the organization, no matter what their role or function is, and say they do or don't exhibit this behavior. And so when I'm giving coaching or feedback, I can say, hey, this is an area of opportunity for you, or you're doing great at this. That is how you create culture. And the most, and it's hard to say it's the most important thing, but it's the thing that I think is missing the most inside organizations is we say, what are the ground rules in behaviors, not values, behaviors and mindsets, right? Around the critical important things. How do we, not just how we treat other people, but what are our mindsets around change, right? Are we agile when it comes to change? Do we, right? If we disagree with something, is there an opportunity to have dialogue and debate? But once a decision is made, we disagree. If we disagree, we still commit and move forward. Like that's a mindset. That is a sort of a behavior. And so when we create a culture that's very clearly defined behaviors, we can say this is how we deal with conflict, feedback, change management, like attention to detail, right? And taking ownership of not making mistakes or not repeating mistakes, right? We sort of define what does a 10 out of 10 look like here for every employee in terms of how they perform their jobs and how they treat other people on the team. That's incredibly important. And when when I talk to organizations, I'm like, what is your culture? Like, what culture do you have in place? People talk about their products or their values or whatever. And to me, it's like, do you have a code of conduct that is like, this is our DNA code of how we show up together? That's a culture. What you do once you've created that, the really critical work, right? The commitment level to it, the consistency, how do you implement that in the organization? But that first piece is critical. And I just, when Richard Bransons of the world are out there saying, oh, there's no secret sauce to culture. You just treat other people how you want to be treated. When I hear that, I'm like, it's so incomplete. If we talked about marketing or sales the same way we talk about culture in organizations, you'd be like, you're crazy. If you hired a sales director and they came in and you were like, what's your theory? Like, how do we create a sales plan here that's strategic and tactical? And they were like, there's no secret sauce to sales. You just smile and you shake people's hands and you close deals. You'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. And culture, that's why I see it as a skill. It's like you can deeply understand tactically, how do you do this? And that's one very first clear piece is like, what are the behaviors? What are the mindsets? Cool. I'll stop talking, but that's what I think. I think values are fun, but the work to be done is to say, okay, if excellence is a value of ours, what does that look like in practice? Does that mean that we ask for feedback on a regular basis? Does that mean that we invest in our own personal development and training? Like, what does excellence look like in practice? Very, very, very clearly. So,
what does it look like when we talk about success in excellence, or in being truthful and honest? Like, so does that interpret in terms of the feedback that we're giving and so on? I love that because I think that. As you rightly said, a lot of times people talk about culture, we tick a box, but there's so many missing facets to it. Consistency is important. Communication is important. making sure everyone fully understands where you're sitting in that space where culture is concerned, because we don't want people having different interpretations of what that means. In order for people to be on the same page and for us to move forward as an organization, we have to grasp that, be on the same page, and consistency and clear and concise communication is key. And for people like me who are, I have ADHD, I'm a very visual person. And so for me, it's making sure you communicate it in a way that I can receive it easily. I think a lot of times we forget about, because most people are normal, I would say, what is really normal. When you think about the people in your organization who are neurodiverse and how they interpret and receive information, it's making sure that you include those people. And I think HR plays a very important part in that, in terms of bringing all of those different diversities that are sitting in your organization together to make sure that you understand what our culture is and how we live it, want you to love it and breathe it.
You bring up such an important point. And when I am working with teams and organizations in sort of developing this and establishing those ground rules, it's also like, it can't sound like a policy handbook. Mm-hmm. Like when you create a culture, you have to use authentic language. You have to, if somebody were to read it, they have to feel like this was written by a human being, not an HR jargon robot, right? And so, it's like saying, I just, in some of ours, like, it's like, when there's conflict, we seek to fully understand each other by listening and asking questions to uncover the heart of the matter, right? We collaboratively find mutually beneficial resolutions. But it's like, we take responsibility for our mindsets, our attitudes, our behavior, our choice of words with one another, and how we communicate. Like, we have to use language that sounds like it was written by a human being, right? This is not for external marketing. It's for like, this is what's expected of you, right? To show up as a human being. And it's like, right? It's like, it's so important to do that, to have it be something that is clear to understand. It makes sense. I mean, to me, the goal that I always set for organizations in doing this work is, you should create something that when somebody is being hired, or you're onboarding somebody, or someone's considering working for your company, they could read this code and you could promise to them, this is how every single person shows up here. We live this every day. This is like, our commitment level to this is 100%. That they would read through the cultures, like your DNA code and what you have in terms of like, this is our kind of concrete, specific culture, and be like, hell yes. Like, give people a reaction that is like, this sounds too good to be true, but it's real. It's real language, right? That it says, this is it. We have a short memories around other people's mistakes. If we speak up, right, when somebody is failing, it's to help, not to criticize. It's like very specific, real things that you can interpret multiple ways. It doesn't sound like, again, HR sort of jargony handbook stuff. It's like real talk written by real people. It says, this is what it means to be here.
Relatable. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. People get it. I love that. Let's go to the comments quickly. I saw, based on the question, Norberta, she was saying that her present company culture is not going to change. She works for a family-owned business, so the mission, vision, values are just a tick the box exercise. I think that's how a lot of organizations, sadly, that's all it is. But we hope to change that by driving conversations just like this, and helping you as HR professionals to be able to drive that conversation, to drive change, so that we can move this forward. Any thoughts on Norberta's comment, Galen?
It's something that conversation comes up a lot. People like, how can I get my leadership team? How can I get the rest of my organization, my leaders, to buy into culture if they don't think it's important? And there's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of consistency. And it's very hard, especially, it's a family-owned company, which, family-run businesses, there's a lot of extra dynamics in there, that there's just politics and personal relationships that, where it's very hard to say the real things that need to be said, because there's just a lot of egos and history and stuff involved. And, a lot of times the reality for me when I'm having those conversations with people is like, you can't force people to change. They can only change if they want to change. And a lot of times it's just like, that's how it is, and that's how it will be until the people who have the power and authority and ability to make those changes at the highest level are willing and want to make those changes. And sometimes, my advice is like, if you want to work in a place that has an exceptional culture, they exist. Like, go
Yes.
find one. Otherwise,
Go
you're
find
going to
them.
continue scooping water out of that bottom of that boat because they're
Yes.
like, there's no hole in the boat. We don't need to fix the hole in the boat. There's no hole in the boat. And you're like, cool, where's all this water coming from? And they just don't want to have the conversation. So I hate to be like negative or pessimistic, but a lot of times it's like, it has to, there are leaders, there are leadership teams who believe in culture and what it can do and the impact that it has on performance and engagement and retention, all of those things. And places that just don't get it, they don't get it.
They
And I
don't
know
get
that's
it.
hard, but it's like,
Yeah.
how long do you want to keep banging your head against the wall and hoping things will change?
Yeah.
It's tough, man. It's like, if you could just find a way to be like, you guys, culture will make us more profitable, more successful, we'll have less turnover. And, it can be a very tough conversation sometimes. And my advice is usually like, do everything you can to a point, and then it's like, go pick a place you want to work that is more successful. But that not everybody can do that. So, Norberta, I know that's a very challenging conversation, and I think it can help to have outside voices. So I think it can help to have, resources, videos, blogs that you read to bring to the team, to bring to the leaders, to say, hey, I found this, I thought it was interesting, or I attended the seminar. What do you guys think of this? Let's have a conversation about this. I think it can help to bring outside perspectives for, if there's a lot of pushback around like, what's the value of culture? Yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that. And I would add to that, just asking your leaders like a simple question: what are you really unhappy about right now where the organization is concerned? Like, what's your bug point? And then when you figure out what that is, and then you recognize that you can tie that to a specific code of conduct, well, maybe, if one of the things you're unhappy about is that leaders are not giving enough feedback, well, then maybe if we created a culture where feedback was encouraged and respected. Here's some of the things that I've seen in reading other articles, as you mentioned before, or videos that I've seen, or I always point people to one of the best culture decks that I've seen in a while, outside of yours, obviously, is HubSpot. And I love HubSpot's culture code. It's available on the internet for everyone to see and read. Sometimes I just point people in that direction and go, right in there, you'll see a lot of things that they have created together as an organization. I think the CEO of HubSpot talks very proudly about being a part of this process in terms of creating that code of conduct, and being a part with HR and having other employees being involved in that and creating that culture, and then bringing it down and then saying, look, if you're struggling with culture, I'm sharing this. You can pick stuff out of it. You don't have to adopt all of it, but there are places and resources that you can pull from that would help you to strive in terms of having that conversation with regards to getting buy-in to creating a great company culture if you're struggling with that.
Yeah.
I would say.
And a lot of times I think if you're up against, right, as an HR business partner, if you're up against the CEO or members of the C-suite that are like, culture doesn't matter, it's like, look at what a lot of organizations struggle with. What you said, what are the pain points? We have high turnover. Mm-hmm. Turnover is very expensive, and we're training new people and it's like, well, I think making a business case around sort of like, here's the impact of these things, and looking for ways to support that business case to be like, how does culture impact turnover and retention and attracting better talent, and focusing and building those, building those sort of compelling business cases rooted in the things that are costing the organization the most amount of money. If people don't just get it, they're not heart-forward leaders, they don't understand the value of culture, helping them see it in their own language, right? In a way that like, this is how it affects the bottom line. This is how it impacts performance, engagement, right? Turnover, attracting talent. Like, why are we losing people to this other organization that is paying, more money or similar or a competitor of ours? It's like, well, let's take a look at what's different there than us. And culture is, for the most part, other than the time it takes to do it, it's something that doesn't cost anything, right? You can create, and it's like, it takes the time and the resource and the know-how of how to do it, but it's not a huge like money investment to be able to like create an exceptional culture. So anyways, a great question. Charlene had a very similar one, right? How do you encourage management that developing company culture is important? And it's that, so like building a business case in the language that they understand, like, what are the pain points of the organization? So yes,
definitely. And I think we've answered that question. I hope we answered it adequately for both of you. But if you need any help, any support, you know where to find us. I want to talk about where we start in terms of developing culture. I think we've already kind of touched that a bit. But what would you say are the key drivers in building a great company culture? Let's touch on this a little bit.
Good. Because I got to talk a little bit about that first piece of
Yes,
defining and creating, but I want to talk about the next pieces that make it actually, once you do that, what do you do next? How do you actually bring it to
exactly.
life and make it happen? So,
Exactly.
and just to get a little bit more tactical and tangible here in terms of the how to. So, the first piece I think is, again, to define that code of conduct. And a question that comes up around this that I definitely want to talk about is that's not something you as a leader have to do on your own. When I work with teams, I think that the whole process begins with a round of feedback from your people, right? And just very simply saying, hey, what do we do great in our workplace culture? What are our biggest areas of opportunity to improve? How would you rate our culture on a scale of 1 to 10? And what is the single most important thing we could do to improve culture here? I think start with a round of feedback so that you can incorporate people's feedback and what they're seeing from the ground into the work that you're doing to say, man, these things are real challenges for us. Let's make sure that we address those and are really clear about them. But that's number one. Define a very clear code of conduct and the ground rules for organization, not in values, but in actual behaviors and mindsets. Step two, once that's in place, I think the executive level team, the top level leadership of the team has to answer the question. So I see culture as being sort of like the 3 C's, one being clarity. And clarity is like define your culture in behaviors and mindsets. Crystal clear. The second C, the second piece is commitment. And it's that it has to be, the executive team has to understand that the commitment level of that culture, those ground rules and that code of conduct has to be 100%. If it doesn't apply to every single person in the organization, regardless of their role or function or tenure, it's garbage. And that the commitment level has to be 100 out of about 100 percent. There are no exceptions, there are no exemptions. Doesn't matter if you're the CEO, it doesn't matter if you worked here for 25 years and you're going to retire in 2 years. Everybody is held to the same consistent standards of accountability, of performance, and how they show up as a person. That has to be in place. If you have a lack of accountability and a lack of consistency where some people can get along, can do certain things and other people can't, none of it is real. It's garbage. And that commitment at 100%. And the third piece, that is the piece that I think, now that we've gotten past those other 2 things that are often missing inside organizations, the third piece is consistency. And how do we take that behavior, that code of conduct that we've created, those ground rules, how do we implement it at every single level inside the organization? So it's not something that we just put on a poster, put on a wall. It looks pretty, and we salute it in our company meetings, but nobody actually sort of talks about it. We don't do anything about it. And it's sort of what I call kind of feeding the fish, is that we have to do the work every day to keep it alive. And so that means incorporating that code of conduct into hiring, onboarding, training and development, feedback and coaching conversations, rewards and recognition, all of those things that have to do with employees. That code of conduct needs to be the anchor for all of those things. It's how we onboard people. It's what we look for as we hire. It's setting people's expectations around their job performance and what's expected of them from day one. Any of the feedback and coaching conversations that we have with any employee are all based in that code of conduct. It basically should be if you're doing all of these things, you are performing at a 10 out of 10 here. So rewards, recognition, again, that code of conduct has to be something we talk about on a regular basis. It has to be part of our normal conversations as a team. How do we reflect, right? When we come together and say, how are we doing as a team? It should be a reflection of, in relation to this code of conduct, right? What do we do great here? What are our biggest areas of opportunity here? And what would a 10 out of 10 look like for us individually as contributors or leaders or people, as a team and as an organization? We need to be able to have those kinds of evaluative conversations together on a consistent basis, once a month, once a quarter at the latest, to bring that language to the team level and be reflecting about how are we doing in relation to these things. And Diana had asked a question. What was the first step?
What was the first step? So go over the 3 C's again.
Cool. Number 1, clarity. So it's clearly define the rules of engagement, the behaviors and the mindsets that define your culture and what it means to be part of the team. Define the code of conduct. That's number 1, clarity. Second one, commitment. Third one, consistency.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Last but not least, what advice would you give to our HR professionals who are here and who are going to watch the replay in terms of starting from scratch and building a great company culture? What advice would you give to HR professionals? And I ask this is separate and distinct from what does it take to build the culture and create a great culture. In terms of that advice, remembering our conversation is it's not just an HR thing. What's that advice that you have for HR as they strive to create a great company culture?
Yeah, I love this question, and I have an answer that is hopefully succinct. I think the advice for doing this work is that the top level leadership in the organization has to be bought into this work, has to be aligned. If they feel like they're exempt or that it doesn't apply to them, or they're not going to hold themselves and each other accountable to this, right? That it's going to be just for employees and not for the top level leadership in the organization, it will fail. Like, you are doomed to not have a great company culture, because the quickest, easiest way to blow over a house of cards is to have leaders behave one way and not be held accountable to the same standards that like middle level management or anybody on the sort of like front line of the organization is held. And so I think those conversations need to start at the top with your senior level leadership team to be like, where are we around culture? Are we bought into, like, it's the work is to build people's understanding of the value of culture, of the impact of culture, and to start building that case before we start doing any of the work for people to understand this isn't something that the HR can just do, right? It's not a marketing plan just for salespeople. It's every single person in the organization. So my advice is have those meaningful conversations with the executive leadership team. And it's not just out of thin air, right? Even when I work with teams, it's like, what are the strategic objectives of the organization? And how does culture work support those objectives? Because if you want to grow by 300% in the next 2 years or 3 years, like it has to be tied into, what are we trying to do? What is our purpose as an organization? And what are we trying to accomplish strategically? What are our objectives? And how does this culture work support that? There's always a tie-in for that. It's like, do we need, right, more engaged talent, high performing teams, lower turnover, right? Are we attracting more talent? But whether you are growing, maintaining, gaining new business, like, what are the strategic objectives of the organization? How does culture work support that work and build that buy-in for the executive team and the top level leadership of like, this is the importance of this work, right? That we need to throw resources, budget, like energy into this. And this conversation involves all of us. This is not something for HR to go handle over in the HR world. It applies to every person, and it has to start at the top. So that's my advice, is like, start having those meaningful conversations at the top level. And if you have an executive team that for years and years and years, they don't get it, they'll never get it, they don't want to have those conversations, it's like, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't believe that you can build a great culture inside that company. I think you can build a great culture on a team that is like inside a broader culture that is maybe toxic, by doing the same work, defining the ground rules, right? Holding people accountable, having conversations, reflecting as a team. But in terms of like an entire company's organization culture, you cannot have a consistent, successful, great culture if there are exemptions to the ground rules that you're going to create in behaviors. That's the reality of it. So that's my advice, is you have to get that buy-in. You have to get the executive team to understand the value of culture and be bought in and understand that it is their work as much as it is HR's work. So that's what I have to say.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly on all of those words that you use. I'll just say ditto. I'll just say ditto and leave it there for now. Any final comments, recommendations that you want to make to our audience today, Galen, as it pertains to building an awesome, intentional company culture, whether it's from an HR perspective or an organizational perspective, a human perspective? What are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I guess maybe just echoing something that I said earlier, is that understanding how to do culture inside an organization is a skill. It is something that you can brush up on, learn to do, understand, and like seek that out. You become incredibly valuable as any member of a leadership team or any member of any team if you understand this is how to create culture. This is the step-by-step way to like go about this. And so I think seek out that education, that learning. There's resources. I have a lot of content around that too, but I think it like understand culture as a skill and start adding that to your skill toolbox it makes you so incredibly valuable to an organization to be like, I actually know how to do this thing that it's very hard to find someone that they understand the value of culture and how great it is and how wonderful it can be when it's great, but how do you do it? I think that having that skill is incredibly, it just makes you so valuable as part of any team or organization or as an HR business partner.
Absolutely. And I would also strongly recommend that if you are not following Galen, you need to do it today, like right now. Not now. Pay attention here. But when you're finished watching this live, I want you to go and find Galen on YouTube, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Go find him. He has these amazing videos that he does every week. They're called Culture Drop. I have been watching them particularly consistently since early last year, and right through. I'm always watching Culture Drop because I learn something new every single time. They are great short videos on how you can create a great organization, how you can build your leaders, how you can get buy-in, how you can fill your gaps and still feel purposeful in your work. So if you are looking for something else to add to your toolbox so that you can say, I know how to do this, and this is the way I make your recommendations. And if you have leaders who have short attention spans, you can share these short videos and they will get the point and you'll be able to move things forward. You can find the videos under Galen. Galen's going to tell you how to find him on all social media platforms very shortly. But I would definitely highly recommend checking out those videos. They will save your life. I promise you that. I have learned so much from you, Galen. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken today to help our audience understand that building a culture that is intentional, purposeful, and great is not just an HR thing. They are not alone. If people want to engage your services, how would they go about doing that? Because we have people joining us from all over the world, and I know you do great work everywhere. How can people engage you to help them if they're struggling with building their culture?
Cool. Also, thank you so much for your kind words. I really, 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 truly appreciate that. So thank you, Julie.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
And if anyone is interested, the Culture Drop emails, it's basically every Tuesday morning. It's a 5-minute video around teams, leadership, communication, culture. This morning's one was around maintenance conversations as a leader, as in any relationship. Last week we did one around like returning to work and COVID and navigating that. So the topics are all things leaders and teams and organizations and culture.
Current.
Yeah, and my website is galenemanuele.com. But my YouTube channel also is there. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn. Reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn if you'd like.
There we go.
So, there you go. There's some links there. So I put out a lot of free content. And if people want to hire me to engage, I speak at conferences and do keynotes, but I also do like individual skills training with like all staff or just leadership teams. And then also do engagements with organizations of like working over a 6-month period, over a 12-month period of like really going through step-by-step, defining culture, establishing culture and putting things into practice. So I have like a really kind of refined, specific process that I walk teams through there. But if any of you seeing this want to just reach out and connect, talk about culture, have questions, I love talking about any and all of these things. So if there's an opportunity for us to like work together in official capacity, cool. If not, like still reach out to me. Would love to connect or answer questions or be helpful or valuable if I can in any way. So Julie, thank you again so much for having me. It's such a treat. And thank you everybody in the comments for asking great questions and being involved. I hope that there were a couple nuggets here for you to take away and use somehow. So yeah,
you guys were awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So coming up next, I like to share how we're going to move forward with our conversations. We are going to continue a conversation that I started earlier this year with my 3 friends, Stacy Lewis, Dr. Stephanie Johnson, and Darlene Slaughter. We were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, moving from insight to action. We have gained so many insights about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but how do we move from just talking about it to actually moving it forward and and carrying it out in our organizations in an intentional way. We had this conversation in March this year. Here I go losing my voice. We had this conversation in March. If you were watching on the Hacking HR Global Conference, Stacy, Stephanie, Darlene, and I had this conversation, and people loved it. So we agreed that we would move it from Hacking HR and have a conversation here on HR Sound Off. So you can join us next month around the same time. You'll see the information come out. Come join us to have this conversation. How do we move diversity, equity, inclusion forward? We've been having that conversation for so long, but how do we take it from insight? Now we know. How do we move it to action? Get our organizations to actually move forward and make a difference and progress. So that will be our next conversation. Galen Emanuele, you are absolutely awesome. It is always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. And as I said before, people, if you do not know, now you know. We are moving our conversations onto LinkedIn as well. I will be starting a new series, which is an extension of HR Sound Off. And I'm going to give you the little backstory to this. I had been applying for LinkedIn Live for so long, probably from the time I started HR Sound Off. So let's say that was last year. I had about 10 applications in with LinkedIn to apply for LinkedIn Live so that we could do these sessions live without doing them on YouTube. And I couldn't get anywhere with LinkedIn until a couple of days ago when I finally took to Twitter and told them I had enough. And within a couple of days, LinkedIn Live appeared. And I was so happy. So we are going to have our conversations. We'll still be having live monthly conversations here, but we're now going to introduce Amplifying HR Voices. It will be live on LinkedIn every Wednesday from 12 p.m. American Standard Time till 1 p.m. So join me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, we will still have our monthly lives here, having pertinent conversations, but I want to amplify HR voices. If you've been following me for a while, you know I'm very passionate about mental health and HR professionals getting their own self-care, whether that's engaging in mindfulness, doing stuff for yourself, or if you are just looking to hire a coach, hire a therapist. But I want you to take care of yourselves, HR. And I think that if there's one thing that we've learned through COVID is that we weren't doing what we needed to do to take care of ourselves. We've been on a crazy adrenaline rush for the last year and some, taking care of the people in our organizations, and we've neglected ourselves. I will be the first to put up my hand and say, I've had those struggles. I saw a video that Galen did just the other day with his cat. So everything looks fine. Then the next thing, no, not so good, not so good. And that's the case for a lot of us as HR professionals. And I just want us to do better at taking care of ourselves. So I will be amplifying HR voices, talking to HR professionals who actually want to share their experiences about their mental health challenges, whether it be at work, why they've left the profession and moved on to consulting. But I'm just going to keep it real because I think that we need that. And we need to amplify these situations. People need to understand that HR professionals, we come from a place of love and appreciation, but we have our struggles, and it's important that people know that we do in order for them to have a greater respect and understanding for us. So I hope that you will join me for those conversations every Wednesday. But Wednesday evenings, I'll be recording twice on Wednesdays now. In the afternoon, magnifying HR voices, and then once a month in this same time, we will still have our HR Sound Off live sessions. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. Galen, thank you once again. I love you guys, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you for sticking through to the end with me, those of you who are still here. We'll be back again next month.
Cool.